Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, as the case may be. We're glad you're here. We're letting folks come in for the next few minutes, and we're very glad you're here.
Welcome. You will be joining us muted and with video off, just because we'll have a large number of people in this webinar. So if you need to talk to us at any point, just use the chat. Feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat at any moment. We'd love to see who's here. And we're just going to take the next couple minutes to let everybody in. Welcome to those who've just joined. We will be getting started in a minute or so. Again, you'll be joining muted and with your video off. I don't think the system's going to let you turn on your video or unmute yourself, but that's okay. We have the chat for that reason. So feel free to use it at any time. We love to have conversations over the chat. So just if you have any trouble finding it, it's a button at the bottom of your screen, probably says chat. Go ahead and open that up and tell us hi. Tell us who you are.
And later on, we'll ask you a question or two. So it's worth limbering up those fingers anyway.
Nice. We're still getting quite a few people joining us, so we'll take a minute or two before we get started. Welcome to those who've just joined. So glad to see you here. Oh yes, and Brett, nice to see you. It's great to see a number of our members here.
What we'll be presenting today is some work that a portion of the work that we presented to the membership not too long ago, but just to give you an idea of the key insights from that donor initiative.
All right, things seem to be slowing down a little bit, so I'll let in these last few people and then we'll go ahead and get started. I'm sure some people will be joining us as we go along. Let me just give you thank you for those who are starting to introduce yourselves in the chat. Seems like you've gotten comfortable with that. Hello and welcome. So delighted to have you all here. My name is Karen Freeman. I'm the Executive Director of Research at the Advisory Board for the Arts, and I am joined by my fabulous colleague and Chief Research Officer of ABA, Pope Ward. So as Pope mentioned just a moment ago, our focus for today's webinar is donors, specifically how to cultivate more large donors so we don't have to rely so much on the same trusted sources over and over. What is the value proposition that will pull these new donors closer into our orbit? It is an important time to be looking at donor behavior. You know, the pandemic has created new challenges and new opportunities, and there are big changes afoot in donor motivation that we have to get on right now so we don't get left behind. Based on the data, we will come to some specific conclusion about where the greatest opportunity lies. We found there is a segment of donors that is both very generous and underserved. So we will spend much of our time today framing that story. But before we start, a few notes of logistics. At this point, you're probably all very familiar with Zoom, but just in case you are not, we will have a large number of people on this call. We will keep everyone muted and with video off for the session. And again, you are encouraged to use the chat to ask us questions or to connect with each other. We're all joined today by our colleague Lisa Swain, who will help keep track of your questions. Feel free to start entering in your questions at any point in the chat. To me or to Lisa or to Pope at any moment. We also would love to hear from you and see exactly who has joined us. I see a few people have already gotten that started, which I am so grateful, but if you haven't yet, please just use the chat box to introduce yourself, tell us where you are from in terms of your organization and location in the world. It is always a wonderful thing to see the range of people who can join us on these calls. And it also might make you all a little bit more comfortable to type questions and comments into the void if you know who else is going to be in the virtual room with you. So let me give you one more look at that. This is actually wonderful set of attendees we have for today's conversation, the people who registered for today. As you can see, we have representation from all genres of arts and culture, multiple countries, a really rich set of folks to join in the conversation. So please take advantage of the fact that they're all here to ask some questions in the chat as we go along. So with that, let me introduce our agenda for our time today. It is pretty straightforward. We'll spend about 10 minutes setting up the donor questions that member organizations asked us to look into as we started this research several months ago. Next, we will dig into the key findings, including a few surprises we found there. And then in the third section, we'll start the conversation about the implications of those findings. We have a lot more for our members to explore on our website and through conversations with their member advisors as always. And we're happy to take questions along the way in the chat. It looks like someone's already done some advertising in the chat as well. So we'll keep it mostly to questions and comments. I'm not sure. Download at your own risk, I'm afraid. So let's go ahead and dig right in.
Fantastic. Hello, everyone. The data that you're looking at here tell what is likely to be a familiar story for many of you anyway. Donations trending upward over time, but from a dwindling number of givers. These data that you see here are pre-pandemic from TRG, and it's just for 3 years, 2014 to 2017. But this trend is decades old for many of us. Not true for all, but for most. One US organization that we spoke to recently said that 90% of their contributed income comes from just 10% of their donors. And that is on the high side, but it's not crazy far off for many of our members. Of course, the picture for Europe is a little bit different, but it ends in the same place with less of a culture of individual donation. European donors typically give more, but there are many fewer of them. So now we're looking at what happened in the pandemic. The dark blue bars that you see here are for the US and the teal bars are for the UK. Again, this is from TRG and it's UK data partner Purple 7. On the left, the overall picture for last year. In the US, we saw that the number of donors actually increased by 15%. That is probably thanks to people donating back the purchase price of tickets and also kind of emergency donations that would come in for, like a natural disaster or something like that. But the dollar amount of donations went down for the US. In the UK, the number of donors and the amount contributed, both of those declined. For areas of the world like the UK and Europe, Asia, that are trying to start a culture of individual philanthropy, the pandemic was a real culture killer. The reason that the revenue numbers look so bad is there on the right. Our largest donors generally didn't stick with us at the levels we needed. It's worst over there at the far right in the gray shaded area. For those giving in the millions, total revenue dropped off by anywhere from a third to a half, depending on where you were. So, most of us enter 2021 a bit wobbly. And despite the general good news of reopening, we do have concerns for our post-pandemic fundraising position. So here, the page title kind of says it all. This is truly a pivotal moment for us. On the one hand, the pandemic has created a real disruption for us. Have we worn out our donors? It's unclear. In the face of deep social unrest, organizations are changing their repertoires to reflect, community diversity, but that can steer right into political polarization and the tastes of our current big donors who aren't getting any younger, number 4 there. Times of disruption change habits, and that's likely to be especially true this time when lives were so drastically shaken up. There's real possibility that some donors will leave us to support causes that are lower down, the Maslow's hierarchy. All of this is occurring at a time when there is a massive wealth transfer that will place funds in the hands of a generation that is less inclined to the arts. But the pandemic has also opened up opportunity. We've shown patrons a fuller picture of who we are as organizations, and we're no longer tethered to the way we always did things. So in our view, now is the moment, as we're poised to reopen, to consider what we've learned from this past year and what we want to take with us into the future and what we want to change.
Yeah, it's definitely time for some real talk. For many of us, we made it through the pandemic. I know our friends in Australia or Asia may be, still in this wobbly period, but for many of us, we're looking at the end of the tunnel. And development teams were often the reason the organization was able to keep going, as many other sources of revenue dried up completely. That's something to be incredibly proud of. But as part of our research, we spoke to the heads of development from 56 different arts and cultural organizations. We talked to dozens of donors. We had a lot of conversations. And in those conversations, particularly the ones with your peer arts and culture institutions, we heard about the very real challenges you faced during the pandemic and even before. Most of you made it sound like current course and speed isn't really sustainable. So we need to think about what can we change, what challenges we face, and the assumptions that we make that are behind those challenges. And perhaps by testing those assumptions, we can find new and sustainable ways to operate. So we've summarized those 56 conversations here on the next page. We organize the activities under the classic donor pyramid, right? And donors enter at the lower level, gradually increasing to mid-level, and then some portion commit to fully supporting the organization at the level of major donors. It's an oversimplification, but it's a mental model that most organizations use for donors. And for our entry donors, we typically use a benefits ladder approach, particularly in the US, right? We attract them in from our subscriber pool with a tiered set of benefits to increase the value of their experience. Now, we heard your concerns there in the challenges section. By enticing entry-level donors with benefits, have we anchored them in a transactional mindset? Does it make them less likely to increase their giving, or does it make them more likely to expect even more in benefits in return for that increase? We know that early donors get easily locked into a donation amount. So if we want growth at this level, we have to constantly be pulling in from our subscription base, which isn't typically getting larger. So that's challenge set number one. As we move up the pyramid, we focus on more benefits and mass communication of our activity to improve the closeness of donors to us. And then we start looking for signs that they're maybe ready to become major donors, such that we might assign them a donor officer and do more personalized cultivation. But there are even more challenges here in the middle. Our mid-tier donors, in a way, they're a mystery to us. There's too many of them for us to know them all personally. And at some point, we get this sense that a donor may start to increase, and that's typically when we think of them as becoming philanthropic, since the amount they're donating is more than the benefits that they're receiving. But we really don't know. And we don't have a lot of knowledge other than, say, a wealth screen about these individuals. So we often undercultivate. Plus, there's the fact that the more concentrated our donor base gets at the major donor level, as Pope talked about earlier, the more we have to spend our time there at the top instead of finding the next generation of big donors. So speaking of the top, let's look at them next. Here we give full concierge service, right? We cultivate our major donors by building personal relationships and working to understand individual interests and their motivations to support us, and then tailoring our approach to each and every one of them. And we feel pretty great about our knowledge and our relationships, but so the risk, it's a little bit of a different kind. Here, changes in donor preference or loss of a single donor, it can all be devastating, especially given the challenges with cultivation of mid-tier donors. And in the meantime, our closest donors may not have the same opinion about our artistic direction as we do. So artistic choices can have a big impact on our major donors' willingness to support us in a given year. So that summarizes the challenges that we've heard. And when we were talking with all of you about your operations, 3 assumptions behind this became clear. I think you'll agree with them all. First, we assume at the bottom there that transactional benefits appeal to most of our low-end donors. That's why they stay, and that's why they increase. Second, we assume that our mid-tier donors naturally shift to be more philanthropic as the value of their donation increases relative to the benefit that they receive. And our goal here is to figure out how to speed up this process. And third, we cultivate our top donors based on their deep love and appreciation for the art form. So these assumptions are fundamentally what we decided to test in our quantitative initiative. If any of these assumptions turn out to be incorrect, it's a huge opportunity to change the way we operate. So we've summed up the question, the major question for the research here at this statement at the bottom of the page. How can we resonate more deeply with new high potential donors and move them from transactional to philanthropic to accelerate their velocity to major giving? So that is what we will spend about the next 30 minutes or so looking at. Starting at the end of 2020, we recruited about 5,000 donors to fill out our extensive survey. It came from 47 different organizations. I know a number of our participating organizations are here on the webinar today, so a big thank you. I know this survey was not short. We really appreciate you being generous in offering up your donors' time and your donors for taking it. Just so you know, the respondents had to have donated at least $250 once in the past 3 years, but it went all the way up to major donor level. As you can see with the pie charts here, they covered dance, theater, opera, symphony, chorus, festival, museum, and presenters, and we had participants from the US, UK, and Canada. UK and Ireland, if I combine it. So then we asked a couple of questions. You can see the general categories here on the right. We asked about motivations for giving, context, things like attendance, other nonprofits they support, their relationship and activities with the organization. And we asked a lot of questions about their donation history and their donation plans. So the first analysis we did, there's a few of them here at the bottom of the page, but the first one we did was looking at donor motivations to give. And they had 12 different options to rank from low to high importance. For example, we asked about their love of the art, supporting their friends and family, accessing benefits, building a legacy, a lot more. So let's look at that first look of what they said. First, we just looked at, what percentage of people agreed with a particular statement, and that first look was really unhelpful. It's not on the page fully, but like pretty much everyone said the same thing. 94% of our donors say they want to support and sustain the work of the arts organization they donate to. And nearly 90% say they love the art form. But of course they say that, right? It doesn't tell us much about their deep motivations or how to cater to their interests when everyone universally provides the expected answer. To give an analogy, if you ask people why they put their money in a bank, they'll say, I want to keep it safe. But given almost every bank is FDIC insured or otherwise secured by the government, it doesn't mean that when you're appealing to bank customers, you should be talking exclusively about safety. So we need to dig further into the data to really understand the patterns. And that's where a method called cluster analysis comes in. It helps us find patterns across all the responses. And then we can see if there are threads between answers that cluster together. So we did that cluster analysis on the 12 motivations to donate, and it turns out they cluster into 3 groups. And those groups are, in a sense, really intuitive. So the first donor segment we found, and it should be no surprise given how we attract new donors typically, is those who are motivated by the benefits. You can see the primary motivation categories below. There's a strong theme here, right? They're motivated by access to benefits, by access to the network of donors, and potential tax write-offs. We knew we had a segment of benefits-driven donors, and indeed we do. The next segment we call arts lovers. These are people who are indeed motivated primarily by the love of the art and supporting the cultural vibrancy of their area. The last group we'll call community donors. Their motivations are in order of importance below, but when I look at it, I see two different themes that come together in this one donor. One is that they support projects and community activities, and they want to leave a legacy. These are the people who want to have impact on the community where they live. And the other is that they support their friends and family, and they want access to the network of donors. That implies they want to be part of a community. At any rate, overall, you can see what I mean by intuitive categories. 3 donor motivation categories, and I bet you can think of some donors you've met who fit into each of these categories. So which one of these segments do you think is dominant? We wondered that ourselves, and that's when the first surprise came. When you do segmentation work with large data sets, one of the steps involves sorting participants mathematically into each of the segments you've identified. And what we found is that they are roughly equal. So overall, benefits and community donors are each 31% of this sample, and then arts lovers there in the middle, that's 38%. And there is some variation here for different genres. We looked at symphony, they have slightly more arts lovers, presenters, more benefits donors, museums, a few more community donors. But in general, the split is pretty similar. So if our donors are roughly evenly split by these categories with a slight trend towards art lovers, what happens to their donation characteristics as you move from entry level to major donor through the pyramid? Well, based on our conversations, we imagine that benefits donors would be concentrated in the lower donor tiers and arts lovers would dominate the high end. So that's where we were surprised again.
So if there's one page that you use to explain to your friends, your colleagues, what happened today, this is probably it. It shows the division of donors from small to large. Smaller donors, they're at the bottom, and the largest donors at the top. So each of those bars is looking at the percentage of the 3 donor segments that Karen just described in that tier of donations. So each row adds to 100. Everyone has a slightly different definition for what a major donor is. We heard lots. We chose to show the tiers that you see here. So less than 1,000, 1,000 to 10,000, more than 10,000. But if you have different cutoffs, don't fret. We tested the trend using various cutoffs for each tier, and you can feel pretty confident that the trend is the same, even if your donor tiers are different. By the way, there are dollar signs here, but this includes non-US currency. We converted everything into US dollars just for the sake of apples to apples. Honestly, this is kind of an inversion of what we expected to see. Instead of shrinking, both benefits donors and community donors are a bigger percentage of donors at the higher giving levels. Arts lovers decline as a percentage of the whole as the donation levels increase. It certainly surprised us. So what we'll do in the next few pages is unpack each of these patterns in turn, starting with those benefits donors that you see there in blue on the left. So this is the exact same data as the prior page, but focusing on those benefits donors. And what you see is what we just said, which is the amount goes up, the percentage of benefits donors actually increases. One of the most common things we've heard donor shops say is that they know that benefits work to bring in donors through the front door, but over time they want to persuade those benefits donors to become more philanthropic. What these data suggest is that just doesn't happen. Benefits donors remain benefit focused even as they give more money. That might seem kind of odd given that there's almost no benefit whose cash value could be worth the high-end donations that your benefits driven donors are giving. But clearly, many donors place a high value on our benefits. We had a lot of donor interviews as part of this initiative. And one theater donor that we talked to said that she gave $10,000 just so that she could get valet parking. And of course, valet parking isn't worth anywhere near the amount that she paid. She could be brought by chariot for $10,000 a year, right? But it was worth it to her, is the point. So don't start dismantling those benefits ladders just yet. Of course, we could ask the question, did we do this to ourselves? From the moment we get their contact information, we're offering potential donors tangible benefits in trade for their contributions. Maybe we've taught them what to value. And maybe if we were to downplay the role of benefits in our communications and focus more on other motivations, we might attract and retain more of those other donor types. But then again, if benefits work, why not continue to use them? Because benefits donors are more likely to get locked into a donation level. That's the problem. We looked at who increased their donation between 2018 and 2020. That's the period for which we collected data. And it was only about 26% of benefits donors, which was lower than any other segment. Okay, let's move on to the next donor type, arts lovers. We thought that they were going to be our biggest set of top donors. And we were sort of right. It turns out that they're the biggest set of donors somewhere. It's the low end. It is kind of gratifying. The biggest proportion of those entry-level donors being arts lovers, but it is also too bad that they shrink as a proportion to the other segments as donation levels rise. One clue for why they're so big at the low end comes from our regression analysis. The most important driver of donation at that level, more important than insider benefits or early access, is emotional connection to the organization. And being an arts lover donor type, that is just below that, number 3 there. Being an arts lover is really tightly connected to emotional connection in this case. For arts lovers, the art form itself elicits a sense of emotion. You don't need an explanation of why the arts are important or what the performance or exhibit means to you emotionally. These individuals just kind of get it. And that makes them more likely to donate. But there's then an open question of why arts lovers don't donate at the same percentages at higher levels of donation. And we don't have an easy answer to that, I'm afraid, but for whatever reason, they're overrepresented among low-end donors and their horsepower trails off as donation amounts increase. There is a bit of a clue in the data, although it's not on the page, which is that in addition to their arts giving, arts lovers tend to donate to other nonprofits as well, particularly environmental or social justice nonprofits. So they love the arts, but they also love this kind of notion of changing the world, it seems, right? And so the diffuseness of their giving might make it harder to give lots to any one place, or they just may have more competitors for their top level giving.
So as it happens, we think the final category of donors might be the most interesting, or is the most interesting. As a reminder, the community donors aren't just the ones who appreciate your community engagement activities. They are also there to support friends and family. They're more likely to want to leave a legacy and want to be part of the network of donors. These donors are 35% of the top end, and they are surprisingly engaged with your organization. Although most participating organizations did remove current board members from the survey list they provided to us, we did ask donors about various forms of participation with the organization in the past 3 years, and many of them talked about board or committee participation. And for those that did, nearly half of them were community donors. So the most important data point we found across the whole analysis, and it's about the opportunity the community donor represents, is on the next page. We looked at average donation size across our survey participants, separated by annual giving and other giving. So the other giving is things like galas, campaigns, anything the donor themselves didn't consider annual giving. And while the three different segments had pretty similar levels of annual giving, with a slight edge to the benefits donors, the community donor gives twice as much in other giving. So when you add up the total giving across 3 years, the community donor gives the most. Again, these include non-US contributions converted to US dollars, even though it's in dollar signs. I'm pretty sure this is not what any of us would have expected. We all know our gala donors. We tend to think they're not annual supporters. And it turns out most of them are contributing more and more often. And it's because of a desire to impact the community and be part of the community. This, to me, is the biggest insight of them all. Clearly, community donors represent the biggest opportunity for us. If this is how they behave today with current levels of cultivation, what would they give if we connected better with their motivations? There are a couple of other features about community donors we think make them a really important target for our cultivation activities. First, as I mentioned earlier, they're more active than the other types of donors. So that's what you're seeing here on the left. They're more likely to attend our events, whether they're fundraising or others. They're more likely to be volunteers. So they are really interested in building relationships with us as well as with each other. And on the right, they are consistent in their interest in the community. So unlike the arts lovers, as Pope mentioned, they tend to give to social justice or environmental causes. The community donor is more likely to donate to other community causes like education, hospitals, churches, or other religious organizations, or community development charities. So with all of this put together, I imagine we're feeling pretty good about the community donor right now, and realizing that there are some real implications for our donor value proposition at all levels. Of course, this is something we've heard about before.
So indulge me, if you will, and we'll jump for a moment into the Wayback Machine to 2012. There was a Washington Post reporter named Catherine Boyle who was writing about a challenge that's been concerning arts organizations for some time, which is cultivating the next generation of donors. And so you can see, in the article over here on the left, it was profiling a couple with 4 children under 13 who, defying age stereotypes, was playing an active role in arts philanthropy in Washington, D.C. And so the article points out that younger philanthropists tend to donate to community development. And when they're donating to the arts, they give to places with strong education and community development initiatives. We really liked the way that Bob Lynch of the American for the Arts put it in this article. He called it kind of arts and something else. That's what these community-focused donors were looking for. And right below that, he says, community development is what many donors are interested in, and arts are a tool that helps deliver that community value. That way of thinking about community donors is simple, but it's also profound. It's not that they don't appreciate the arts. It's that these donors need to understand what the arts is doing for them and the that helps to progress the interests of the community. So how would you characterize the nature of the good that the arts are doing in the community beyond simply providing a chance to see the arts? If that question was relevant in 2012, it's even more urgent for us now. Those younger donors back then are now kind of our core donors today. But many of us haven't quite adjusted to this world of and something else. As long as our donors told us they liked the art, we hoped that would be enough, even as we saw giving concentrate in the hands of a smaller number of big donors. Our survey analysis shows that it's time to take this and something else issue seriously. So what might something else be in the arts? The simplest answer is something as straightforward as we help with arts education. The message becomes, we love the arts and teaching more children to love it too, something like that. But who doesn't make that claim, right? It's hardly a reason to choose us over some other organization. What if we were more differentiated, more specific, more bold? What if our something else were about, creating a community with more empathy, or building a place where anyone can find an oasis of peace in a noisy, fast-paced world, or creating connections in a polarized environment? That would resonate now. Enabling a sense of belonging, where everyone's story is welcome. There are so many and something else's that we could be, that we could offer to the community. What's the nature of the progress or change that we're trying to make in the community that we're using our art form as a vehicle to affect? The data tell us there's a large, generous set of people who are interested in being part of that something else that we either do provide or could provide. And so let's talk about what that might mean. So, you've got this big, generous chunk of our donor base that's interested in community, and specifically community as something else beyond just the presence of high quality art. What are the implications of that for how we should run our organizations and our development shops? So we will begin to explore, what a community-centric fundraising approach might look like in this last section, number 3 here. So as part of our research initiative, we spoke to dozens of arts organizations about how their development efforts are evolving. And a handful of them have really embraced this notion of creating community value, for audiences, for donors, for the broader community of stakeholders. It is in fact a real mindset shift. What you see here are some of the aspects of that shift as described by member organizations and other arts organizations who are believers in this concept. The first is, the most basic notion of who are the members of the community that we're talking about. And so in development, we tend to think about building a community of donors, or maybe of guests that we'd like to become donors. But these community-centric organizations think about building and serving this broader community and inviting audiences, donors, into that broad community so that they can see how the organization creates community value. And this is, starkly different than that benefits-driven mindset. It doesn't clash with it. You could have both. And then, the focus of the community, number 2 there, for a community-centric organization is also different. Programming is certainly important, but for community donors, the emphasis is on how the community gets stronger because of the presence of the arts organization. That how really matters. It could be economic strength, it could also be moral or ethical strength, greater compassion, whatever. It could be many things. Community-centric donors, want to see some form of community progress rather than just a focus on the quality of the art itself. Community-centric organizations also point out that if you want to get a community experience that's valuable, you need to give up the reins and hand over the experience creation process to community members themselves. When organizations try to design an experience, they tend to make it focused on things that they know, like the stage or the exhibit hall. Do you want this in your community? And instead, these truly community-centric organizations go to their partners and they say, here are a set of capabilities that we have. Are there ways that we could put them to use on your behalf in order to help you do things that you're already trying to do? That point is directly related to the value proposition point, of course. Most arts organizations think about value in terms of how many people have exposure to the art form, free concerts or education, that kind of thing. Community-centric organizations think about community value in terms of that and something else that Bob Lynch was talking about. So all of this might at first feel like it's not that connected to donors, right? But the point is that if you're a community-centric organization, you're not creating a separate exclusive community for donors. You're reframing your overall value from the stage or exhibit hall to include your and something else for the larger community. And then you're using the value that you create there to resonate with donors. So some percent of the people who believe in the value that you're creating in the community are going to want to become more involved. That might just be by attending. It could be by participating in events or even volunteering. And yes, finally, donating is an expression of wanting to be more part of that and something else. It's a completely inverted approach compared to, for example, trying to sell donors on how interesting your education efforts in the community are, for example. So that's a roundup of what we've heard from these community-centric organizations. I thought it would be interesting to turn that question on you. I'm curious, and perhaps you could write it in the chat, what do you think your community donors are looking for from your organization? It could be a single word, something that community donors, get by being involved with your organization. A community is obviously one of those things, but why community? Right, connection. Thanks, Daria. They want to be connected to each other for sure. Are there other things? I wonder. A sense of belonging. That's right, and belonging to your point, Chelsea, doesn't come just by saying everyone is allowed. It comes by creating a sense of purpose that people want to join into and that they opt into. And once they've opted in, that it's that opting in that creates a sense of belonging. Spiritual wellness, interesting. Fulfillment, self-actualization, right? Escape from the mundane, having a voice. Those are wonderful. A nature organization, right? The mental health benefits, that's right. It's so interesting, right? These are all things that you're describing that your art form is a vehicle to help progress within your community. It's exactly what we're talking about here. And you can see how the world beyond arts lovers, which our data suggests are about a third of audiences, and roughly a third of donors. If you can interpret your art form to show its impact on some larger thing like what you've described that you care about, then you open up the world of people who resonate with what you're trying to do in the community to a whole new group. And that kind of turns around this notion of a shrinking donor base. It's wonderful to see this equity, right? That's one that we've heard a lot, and it's a stretch for some organizations. Some, like the Woolly Mammoth Theater here in Washington, D.C., are all about what they would call radical inclusion and having those conversations in the community. That's not an aspiration that every organization can reach. At any rate, these are great thoughts. Thanks so much for them. We'll be sure to capture them. Here on the page, I'll put for you the flavor of a few of the community donor types that we've observed in our interactions with arts organizations. So the first flavor you see here is this notion of community standing. So I don't know if you remember this, but a few years ago when Amazon was looking for a location for its second headquarters, it sent out a request for proposals to a dozen big cities. And it asked respondents to talk about the arts and culture that was available in the community because it wanted that for its future employees. It wanted them to live in kind of a rich environment. That's the notion of community that we're talking about here. It's the relationship that this kind of community donor wants to help perpetuate. The arts have put this community on the map in a sense. But community donors also want to be a part of something. They're looking for a sense of belonging. We saw that in some of your comments. This is often coupled with a need to belong to something that's bigger than yourself. You know, the Boy Scouts teach skills, and that's great. But there's a sense that the community is about building something bigger. You know, an Eagle Scout is a big deal because of the values system that it's a part of, not just because of the list of 38 skills that they've evidenced. Then there's this last flavor of community, which is change agent. When we started getting into DE&I and equity, that's obviously a form of change that lots of organizations are going for now. The BLM and the Me Too movements are not book clubs about a mutual interest. They're raising uncomfortable subjects and they're pushing for community resolution. That's kind of a scary place for many arts organizations to go, but its emotional intensity is also, likely to attract really strong advocates, even as it risks, one of the things that we're least interested in risking right now, which is the commitment of our current audiences and donors. So, let me show you just a bit more evidence about why we might need to move to the right on this page here.
So a bit more data. When we look at how emotionally connected the two philanthropic donor types are to your organization, so that's the arts lovers and the community donors. The arts lovers are in green, the community donors in purple. You'll see the community donors are actually consistently less connected. This is despite being more active. Right, so that's what this chart on the left is showing us. And then on the right, you can see that they are also less likely to believe the organization shares their values. So that's a real problem. And it's likely caused by our arts-centered philanthropic messaging, right? When the messaging is primarily support the arts and help our organization make great art, our arts lovers are very excited by that. But maybe less so for our community donors. I mean, especially at the lowest levels when we want to pull them in. So that's reason one. Here's a second reason to shift our thinking. The data you see here on the left and in a moment on the right is from the Culture Track survey that's run by LaPlaca Cohen and Slover Lynette here in the US. It was focused on the role of race and ethnicity in cultural engagement in the US run last year in 2020. And specifically, it was focused on during the pandemic. So they asked a panel of respondents, some current attendees of arts and culture, some not, whether they thought arts and culture organizations needed to change. And they sorted the responses by race and ethnicity of the respondents. And as you can see here, most non-white respondents said yes at a higher level than the white respondents. Gets even more interesting when you look on the right, you can see what those same people want cultural organizations to do more of. And the punchline is our non-white community members most want community and belonging from their arts and culture organizations. That's even more than great content, whether that content is entertaining or reflective. The very thing we're talking about building is going to bring more racial diversity to your visitors and audience. So let's look at one last piece of evidence for the shift towards becoming a community that stands for something.
Here's some evidence from Colleen Schneider. You may know her. She is the author of the social site Know Your Own Bone. It's about what millennials do want compared to older generations. And it's specifically focused on people who have made a gift to a cultural organization, and it records their answers why. So looking over there at the far left, millennials were much more likely to say that they wanted to join or be part of something. They also said that they were interested in supporting the mission of their chosen organization. That is in contrast to either being asked or the desire to support some specific program or project. By the way, those are tools that are currently a big part of our relationship-based major donor efforts. And so that's really worth noting, that there seems to be a generational shift there. It's for this reason that we think that the nature of the community that development shops need to foster is changing. And let me show you what I mean by that on the next page. So remember, we described those 3 flavors of community donor. There were those donors who are interested in the arts as a pillar of the community, kind of a sign that their community is on the map. They'll always be with us, but as a percentage of community motivated donors, they're likely to decline over time. Those looking to join something bigger, like the millennial data that we saw on the last page, that sense of belonging, that's likely to increase. Principally because it is an attitude of younger donors. And finally, those looking to join a movement or bring about some kind of societal change. Few arts organizations would claim today that they're about driving community change. But is it really so far from what the arts have been about for eons? That we are in part about holding up a mirror to society. We're not suggesting that you need to be waving a standard at the barricade neck deep in society's thorniest problems. We're simply proposing that if you can figure out exactly which important community conversations that you are best suited to host, and then convene the community thoughtfully, you can attract sponsors motivated to drive certain kinds of positive community change. And that's very different than thinking about it in terms of what's on the stage or the benefits that we offer. So the conclusion that we can all draw from this is that first, our purpose needs to be a guidepost for everything that we do. We send signals in every communication, every activity that we do, and those signals add up to us living our purpose as an organization. Second, that purpose needs to be at a higher level than just making great art. In order to attract and retain audiences and philanthropic donors who are not arts connoisseurs. It must be about the arts and something else, what the art accomplishes for our patrons and for the world. What do we mean by purpose above the level of the arts, and how do we figure out the conversations we're the natural hosts for? What is our and something else that's worthy convening a meaningful community around? That's a really good question. And as it happens, we have done a lot of work on this. Any of you who've been joining our webinars or our research sessions over time will know that we at the ABA refer to this kind of and something else as shared values.
Let's take a moment to dig into that concept. Here's our definition of shared values. And as you get to know this concept, you'll actually see it everywhere you look, especially in consumer organizations. Companies like Nike or Patagonia are using this concept all the time. A shared value is a belief that both our organization and our customers have about a higher purpose, passion, or philosophy that has meaning in our lives beyond our specific genre or the arts in general. In our case, it's the belief about the way the world, our chosen community, should work, that we want to make progress on using the arts as a vehicle. You've heard Pope talking about this with this language. What progress do we want to make in the world? And what it does, which is on the right, is exactly what we've been talking about. It connects the core belief of the people in the organization with the human values of the people the organization serves. Consumer brands are onto this, as I mentioned. Think about Patagonia. They don't think of themselves as a clothing company. They are here to save the planet. They find the people in the world who can help them save the environment and then figure out things they can do together to make that happen. Clothes are just a way to enjoy the planet that they're saving. So what good in the world does your organization exist to advance that your art form and your particular way of using it helps with? Your shared value doesn't have to be as revolutionary as Patagonia's, but to energize donors, it should infuse everything you do with purpose. Let me show you a little bit about what that might mean. Here we make infusing your purpose in your fundraising activities a bit more tangible with an illustrative example of a theater hoping to fulfill a shared value of empathy. Daria, I see you would put that one right in there. We are with you on that, right? It is a great purpose. It's above the level of the art, but it's directly connected to it. And the stories that we show on stage, it helps us understand broader perspectives. Stepping into others' shoes, even for a night, it can change us as humans. It connects to the broader conversation that's happening in communities everywhere. And we're all thinking, how do we find common ground when we're increasingly polarized? Maybe theater can provide the answer. But you can't just say you help with empathy and expect people to be compelled by that. You need to show it. And of course, the stories you choose to tell on stage are a big part of it. And the community engagement and education activities you choose to support as well. But development also has a big part to play. So here we show a few categories of activities that should reflect our shared values. And on the top, we show the things you might emphasize, the bottom, things to reduce. So an empathy generating arts organization would have different communications. It would spotlight authentic stories of those moments of empathy. Maybe we could take it a step further and solicit some of those stories rather than just hope they come to us. On the other side, perhaps the harder thing to do is to de-emphasize exclusivity. An institution that is all about building empathy, it can't be closing doors. We would need to look closely at opening up events, inviting people in who normally wouldn't be there, and help use those events to prove our values. Next, our events, donor and audience alike, they would have different flavors, different themes. Maybe we host a speaker series, use our gala to feature those for whom theater has had an impact on their empathy, enable volunteer opportunities beyond the theater. Once we stand for empathy, we need to support it even when it doesn't financially help us. There's really no greater signal of commitment than that. And on the other side, we have to watch that our events don't espouse a single viewpoint rather than bringing multiple viewpoints together. In prospecting or cultivation, once we've been clear about empathy being a value, we need to use it as a screen in our cultivation process. We also have the opportunity to find potential donors in communities that also support empathy. We might measure our impact differently, not just in number of performances, but in impact on the community. And we would potentially bring our community partners into the cultivation process. And of course, we need to stay authentic to those values. So we have to take a closer look at our corporate partners or other cultivation targets to make sure we're not welcoming those who wouldn't match our values. And last, our major donors, those closest to the organization, they can be excellent advocates for empathy. Our board members can support us through monetary contribution, but also through talking to others about what we stand for. When we stand for empathy, they need to be prepared with the debates the community needs to have, the voices that illuminate the need for empathy, or any objections to the community debates that you're hosting. And then at the bottom, while many of us already do this, this puts even more pressure on resisting the donor who doesn't match our values, or worse, seems inclined towards polarization. This is what a true commitment to purpose looks like. And you can see how this clarity of purpose really attracts a donor motivated by community. All right, so we're almost home. I'd like to leave you today with one final image to kind of crystallize what we're going for.
So this is the traditional donor pyramid that we started the day talking about, bringing in those entry-level donors from the subscriber pool at the bottom using a benefits ladder. And as donors demonstrate financial commitment, denominated in terms of donation size, we can reach out to them and form more personal relationships. Then at the top of the pyramid, we cultivate major donors with personal relationships and by appealing to their particular interests and arts motivations. We've learned a lot that challenges our faith in this approach. Emotional connection works better than benefits for entry-level donors. Benefits donors don't become more philanthropic over time. And community donors give more than other groups and are more involved in a full range of activities. They outnumber those arts lovers and other large donors. On top of everything else, the community or the pyramid model, smacks of privileged hierarchy that will face increasing headwinds over time. After all, how many of us would sign on to exclusivity or people give more money to diverse people who give more money deserve special treatment as a core value of ours. Consider an alternative model for thinking about donor cultivation. And so this model has those shared values at its center, and they're manifested in the art the organization produces and in its community engagement in the way it talks to donors. So over time, individuals are attracted by the good that these lived values create in the community and are drawn towards the center. This might seem kind of foreign, but it's a useful thought experiment. If we're trying to pull people toward these shared values, what conversations would we want to host and who should be invited? How would we reinforce belonging and create opportunities for deeper engagement? And how can we demonstrate our commitment to the community through unified programs and partnerships? Honestly, for most of us, this vision is a long way off, but the right time to start is now. And the sooner we start, the more credibility we'll have that we're really about the shared values that we espouse. So
this is the end of our content for today, but certainly not the end of the work that we have. A quick reminder, that you will receive a summary and recording of this session next week, and you'll be subscribed to our Spotlight newsletter if you haven't been already. It will be on our website by the end of this week as well. If you don't want to be part of our newsletter, there's a quick unsubscribe button, so no problem. We would love your feedback in general. Let me go ahead and put this poll up here for you to take. Please do take that poll you see there on the screen before you leave. And we will be returning to this topic. The slides will be part of that, will be part of the final recording that you see. So you can definitely see all of this material. We are so grateful to you for joining us today, including us in your busy worlds this week. We look forward to the next time we will be talking about this data more in upcoming sessions. And we wish you all the best as you begin to reopen your doors. And thank you again for all of your time today.
Thank you all for coming. We really appreciate having you here today.